The cold hit her before the ground did. Nora had exactly 3 seconds between the moment the man's hands found her shoulders and the moment the train was gone. Its whistle by the tree line, its whistle fading into the grey afternoon like something embarrassed by what it had witnessed. She lay in the gravel beside the tracks and stared up at a sky the colour of old dishwater. Her left palm was bleeding. Her trunk was still on the train. Her ticket to Vancouver was still in her coat pocket, which was some kind of joke she didn't have the energy to appreciate. She sat up slowly. The tree line ran in every direction. There was no station, no platform, no sign with a name on it. Just the tracks cutting through spruce and rock, and the silence that poured in to fill the space the train had left behind. She had $40, a wool coat, and half a sandwich she'd been saving for supper. The man who'd pushed her, Crane, the other passengers, had called him, though she'd never learned his first name. Had done it cleanly, almost politely, the way a man removes something from a table that doesn't belong there. She'd made the mistake of sitting in his private car. She'd made the second mistake of telling him, quietly, that she had as much right to the seat as anyone. He had disagreed. And now she was here, in the middle of what she assumed was somewhere in the interior of British Columbia, with the temperature dropping, and no particular plan. The sandwich was gone by the time she heard the horse. She smelled the smoke first. Wood smoke, not the coal smoke of the train. Something older, earthier, coming from the north side of the tracks. She stood, brushed the gravel from her skirt, and made a decision she would later describe as either very brave or very stupid, depending on who was asking. She followed the smell. The cabin sat back in the trees like it was trying not to be noticed. Logs notched at the corners, a roof weighted with moss, one small window with the glass that made everything outside look wavy and uncertain. There was a dog tied near the woodpile. The man came around the side of the cabin at the sound of the barking, and he stopped when he saw her. He was very large. That was the first thing. The second thing was that he had a rifle, hanging loose in his right hand, not raised but not put away either. He wore a canvas jacket that had been mended so many times the original color was mostly guesswork. His beard was the dark red of creek mud in spring. He looked at her the way a person looks at weather, assessing, not particularly surprised. "You fall off the train," he said. "I was put off," Nora said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at the tree line behind her, the way it was already thickening with shadow. He looked at the sky. "Come inside," he said, "before you freeze." His name was Callum. That was all he offered, and she didn't push. The inside of the cabin was one room, cleaner than she'd expected, with a cast-iron stove radiating serious heat and a low shelf of tins along the back wall. There was a table, 2 chairs, a rifle rack above the door with 3 more guns on it. The smell was pine resin and something she would later identify as the furs drying in the lean-to out back, beaver mostly, some marten. He put a tin cup of water on the table in front of her. Not tea, not coffee. Water. "Where were you headed?" he said. He stood by the stove rather than sitting. She noticed he always stood by whatever exit was nearest, not nervous, just habitual. "Vancouver," she said. "I have a position there, a teaching post." He said nothing. "I need to get back on the tracks," she said. "When's the next train?" "Eastbound comes through Thursdays." It was Monday. She stared at the water in her cup. "And westbound?" "Wednesdays. But it doesn't stop here." "What is here exactly?" "Here," he said, like that answered it. She slept on a cot he pulled from under his own bed, which she understood to be a significant offering, even if he gave it as though it were nothing, setting it up in the corner nearest the stove without comment or fanfare. He handed her a blanket that smelled like cedar and turned his back while she arranged herself. In the morning he was already outside when she woke. Through the wavy glass she could see him moving through the snow between the cabin and the tree line. Checking something. Traps, she would learn. Though she didn't know that yet. She built up the fire from the coals because it seemed like the right thing to do, and because she was cold, and because standing still in that small room felt like a kind of panic she couldn't afford. He came in at mid-morning with 3 rabbits and said nothing about the fire, which she took as approval. "I'll need to earn my keep," she said, "until Thursday." He hung the rabbits on a hook near the door. "Can you cook?" "Adequately." "Can you skin?" "No." "You'll learn," he said, not unkindly, just as though it were simply what would happen next. She learned. That afternoon he showed her, without ceremony, how to work a skinning knife, the angle, the pressure. What to do when you hit bone. He demonstrated once. Slowly, on the first rabbit. Then he handed her the knife and stepped back. Her hands shook. She made a mess of it. He didn't say anything about the mess. He just pointed to where she'd gone wrong and waited while she tried again. The second one was better. By the third she had something approaching competence, and when she looked up, he was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not approval exactly, more like the quiet acknowledgement one gives to a thing that turns out to be less fragile than expected. "Not bad," he said, which, she would come to understand, was significant. The storm came on Tuesday night. She knew it was coming before it arrived. There was a particular quality to the silence, a kind of pressure in the air that she would not have recognized a week ago, but now felt clearly, the way you feel a held breath. Callum brought in twice the usual amount of wood without being asked. He checked the ties on the lean-to and the dog's shelter. He filled every container in the cabin with water. "How long?" she asked. 2 days, he said. "Maybe 3. She thought of the westbound train that didn't stop here. "I'll miss the Wednesday train," she said. "Yes, and the Thursday train." He looked at her steadily. "Depends on the snow." The storm was not polite about itself. It arrived in the night with a sound like something very large being dragged across the roof, and by morning the window showed nothing but white. The dog had been brought inside. This apparently was the signal that things were serious, and it lay near the stove with one eye half open, monitoring the room for threats. They were 2 people and a dog in one room for 3 days. She expected it to be unbearable. It wasn't. It was strange and close, and occasionally tense in ways she couldn't name, but not unbearable. He was not a man who felt the need to fill silence, which she appreciated. She had brought a book in her coat pocket. A habit, and she read while he worked on things that needed working on indoors. Mending a snowshoe frame, sharpening every blade in the cabin until they were frightening, stitching a tear in his jacket with the focused attention of a man who understood that small failures become large ones in cold weather. He made coffee in the evenings, real coffee, not the chicory substitute she'd grown up with, and he made it strong enough to stand a spoon in. The first time he handed her a cup, she made the mistake of thanking him profusely, and something in his expression closed slightly, like a door not quite latching. After that, she just took the cup and drank it, and that seemed to work better for both of them. On the second night, the temperature dropped further, and he moved the dog's blanket closer to the stove, and then, without discussion, moved his cot to the far wall and gestured for her to take his position near the warmth. She did not argue. She lay in the dark listening to the storm and thought about the teaching post in Vancouver. The small rented room someone at the school board had arranged, the children she'd been told to expect in September. She thought about Crane on the train, arriving in Vancouver intact while she was here. She thought about how strange it was that she did not feel as frightened as she should. There was something about the cabin, the way it held its heat, the way nothing inside it was decorative. Everything existed because it had a purpose, and the purpose was continuing to exist. She had spent her life in Toronto in rooms full of things that meant nothing, did nothing, just occupied space and required dusting. On the third morning she woke to silence, real silence, not the muffled quiet of snowfall, but the specific absence of sound that means a storm has finished and the world is assessing itself. Callum was already at the door. He opened it and looked out at a landscape so white it had no depth, just surface in every direction. "Storm's done," he said. "I can see that," she said. He looked at her sideways, not annoyed. Something closer to amused, though it didn't go so far as a smile. They spent the day digging out. She shoveled the path to the woodpile while he cleared the lean-to and checked the trap lines. It was hard work and her arms ached by noon, but there was a satisfaction to it she hadn't expected. The immediate, visible result of effort, the cleared path, the stacked wood, the small victories adding up to something you could stand back and see. He returned in the early afternoon with 2 beavers and a marten. "Thursday train should be able to get through," he said. "Good," she said. She meant it. She was almost certain she meant it. She helped him with the pelts. She was faster now, more sure of herself, and he worked beside her in silence, and at some point she realized that this specific quiet, this particular working beside, was something she would not easily find in a classroom in Vancouver or a boarding house on a numbered street. She didn't say that. She kept skinning. That evening he made a stew with the rabbit she'd skinned on the first day, still frozen, thawed now in a pot with dried onion and some kind of root she didn't recognize. It was very good. She'd told him so. He nodded once, stirring, not looking at her. "Your teaching post," he said. "Someone's expecting you." "The school board," she said, "and a class of 32 children who've never had a proper teacher." 32, he said, like it was a difficult number. "Does that seem like a lot?" He looked around the cabin. At the one room, the 2 chairs, the dog, the silence. "Yes," he said. She laughed. She hadn't expected to. It surprised them both. Wednesday passed. The westbound train went through without stopping as promised. A distant sound she heard from inside the cabin where she was reading, and he was mending a snowshoe frame. Neither of them mentioned it. Thursday morning she was up before him, which had not happened before. She put the coffee on and stood at the window in the grey pre-dawn, watching the tree line resolve itself out of the dark. The dog pressed against her leg. She put her hand on its head without thinking. When Callum came in from checking the lines, he stopped in the doorway, taking in the fire, the coffee, the dog leaning into her. "Train comes through at noon," he said. "I know," she said. She handed him a cup. He took it. They stood at opposite sides of the room with the stove between them, and the morning came in through the wavy glass, and neither of them said what was in the room. At 11 o'clock she put on her coat. She picked up her $40 which had not been spent and her book which had been finished. She stood by the door. "I owe you," she said. "No," he said. He was at the table with a piece of tack he was oiling, not looking up. She opened the door. The cold came in, clean and sharp, smelling like snow and spruce. Down through the trees she could already hear the faint vibration that meant the train was coming. That particular trembling in the ground, the tracks beginning to sing. She stood in the doorway for a moment. "Callum," she said. He looked up. "Would you have room?" she said. "For someone to help with the pelts? Through spring, at least, until the next hiring round." He was quiet for long enough that she thought she'd miscalculated everything. "I only have the one cot," he said. The ground noticed that, to tremble. The trees at the edge of the clearing shook faintly as the train's weight moved through the earth toward them. She could see the smoke now, black against the white sky, coming around the long curve to the north. Callum set down the piece of tack. He looked at the coffee on the stove. He looked at the dog, which had not moved from her side. "There's a second chair," he said. "That wants replacing. Wood's rotted through." "I can help with that," she said. "Takes time," he said. "Doing it properly." "I'm not in a hurry," she said. The train came through and did not slow and was gone, and the sound of it faded into the tree line the way sounds do in deep winter, quickly, completely, as if they were never there at all. Nora took off her coat and hung it back on the hook by the door. The dog finally lay down.